My name is Niklas Amundson. I'm joined today by my colleagues in the product management team, Thomas and Miguel, who will introduce themselves later on in their sections. This session is about what's new in Spotfire 10.9, and we'll start with the standard disclaimer. So while we do not intend to make any forward-looking statements, if we should, there is a disclaimer in place. So first, Spotfire 10.9 is a mainstream release. So that means that Spotfire 10.3 is still the most recent long-term support release for Spotfire. And speaking about Spotfire 10.3, I know many customers stay on the long-term support releases, and what's on the slide here is part of what you can look forward to when you eventually upgrade. So the bold items here with the blue identifier are IDs from the TIBCO ID portal that have been implemented since Spotfire 10.3. Altogether, there is a lot of new functionality. There are some bigger features, some smaller, and we can't go through all of these, but there are 3 features of more transformational nature I just wanted to highlight. In Spotfire 10.6, we introduced interactive AI or insights for marked data, and that's a prime example of advanced analytics and visual analytics in a tight integration that helps analysts find insights faster. Streaming visual analytics in the web clients also was introduced in Spotfire 10.6 and enables distributing real-time visual analytics applications to a large user base. And finally, the Python data functions in Spotfire 10.7 opens the Python data science universe for Spotfire applications. But since this presentation is about 10.9, I'll not spend any more time on this now. If you want more information about what's new in the latest releases since 10.3, check out what's new in the Spotfire community pages. So what's new in Spotfire 10.9 then? So starting at the top, so support for dual shared scales is a long-standing request that is now finally available in Spotfire, and this helps visualizing multiple measures more clearly in many cases. Support for Postgres as the Spotfire database. Miguel will tell us more about that. And on the data side, there's a set of improvements to the data canvas, to the Google BigQuery connector, and so on. Thomas will tell us more about that. For developers, there are a few new areas for APIs, but let's start looking at dual shared scales. So Spotfire now has shared scales. This means that you can have columns that share scales, as the name implies. For example, if you want to visualize 5 temperature values and 3 pressure values, you can do this using just 2 scales. That was sometimes a problem in earlier versions of Spotfire. This was actually the single highest voted ID in the TIBCO ID portal when we closed it last week. And it's available in the combination chart, in the line chart, bar chart, and scatter plot. This feature, dual shared scales, is also known as one scale for bars and one for lines, stack bars in combination with lines in combination chart, or allow 2 series to use the same y-axis, and there are many other names. So if you don't recognize the term shared scales, perhaps it's one of these, and there's a good chance that it's now solved in 10.9. So this is how you use it in the UI, but I'll actually try to give a short demo here to show it live instead. So here you see combination chart with stacked bars, and if we want to add another measure to this, like the life expectancy, then you see here, okay, the life expectancy was added, but it's all here because the life expectancy has a much lower value than the total population. So now in Spotfire 10.9, you can just right click on the scale and select dual scales. You see we get a little new scale or column selector here towards the right end, I'll just grab the life expectancy and put it on this column selector, and we now have a graph that shows us clearly how the life expectancy has developed at the same time as we have the bars showing the rural population and the urban population here as well, using just 2 scales. Another feature that we've added, which is kind of related to the scales here, is to select the scale position for single scales. So you can choose whether to have the single scale on the left or the right. Sometimes, for example, when you're looking at time series data, it makes sense to have the scale on the right hand side, as you see in the screenshot here, because perhaps it's the latest values that are the most important and you want to be able to have that more close to the scale. A second quite big feature in the visual analytics area is the ability to configure visualization to use scale labels from another data table. In the example that I'll be using here, what it basically means is that you can use one data table to calculate the values of the bars, so the height of the bars, and to split the bars into the respective categories. But you can use another data table to define the text of the categorical bar labels. So let's see how this works in a little bit more detail. So here we have the real-time Wikipedia's data set. So it has only the country code here, but in the visualizations, we may want to use the full country name, but it's just not available in the real-time data stream. So what we can do then is that we can use another data table, in this case, the world countries data set. And we can use the 2-letter acronym, the editor country code, and it's called country ISO 2 in the world countries data set, to create a match between these 2 data tables. And then we can select to use the country, which is the full country name in human-friendly spellings here, which is available in the world countries dataset. So it works kind of like this, that you start with a visualization that is based only on the real-time data. So you see we have then the just the 2-letter acronyms for the countries. Then we use the data in analysis flyout and select the editor country code, which is the column used to split the bars. And here we have the new feature, display values, where you select to use a column from the world countries data table instead. And that means that we get the full country name in the visualization here, even though that comes from the secondary data table. And now this example was with using streaming data and in-memory data, but essentially it works with any combination of data. So is it in memory or database or streaming? You can use any combination. We also have 2 map chart improvements. The first one is the ability to configure the zoom visibility setting in the business author in the Spotfire web authoring client. So this capability is already available in Spotfire Analyst and allows you to create geographical drill downs, in a sense that when you zoom into a more detailed level, new map layers can be shown that have information on a more granular aggregation level. So this feature gives maps a dynamic touch when you drill up and down. It's now available in the business author web authoring client as well as it already was in the Spotfire Analyst client. The second improvement to the map chart is that the legend now only shows the visible layers. So that means that it's easier to find the information about data on the map, and it reduces the need to scroll through the legend items. Spotfire map charts are able to have a very large number, a very high number of layers that are shown at different zoom levels. And now that Legend only shows those that are visible at the moment, that makes the information more clear. A small feature is the default values for document properties. So when you create the document properties now, you automatically get a default value, which is convenient when you have more complex formats like date, time, and time span. And there is really not important to create a value manually in this case, because you may set it by a script at a later point in time. And we also, based on requests in the ID portal, we've added the display of the file name when you're loading files in the Spotfire web clients as well. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Thomas to take us through what's new in the data access area in Spotfire 10.9.
All right, I'm Thomas Blomberg, Senior Product Manager for TEPCO Spotfire, and I will take you through the data access and data wrangling news in 10.9. First of all, we have a great improvement to the BigQuery connector. So I will just highlight that by showing you Spotfire. So if you go to the Google BigQuery connector, you click New Connection and sign into Google. Select your account, and then you allow Spotfire to access your data. You will see the data source UI. And this is where you configure projects, billing projects, and whatnot as part of the connection. So billing project is something related to billing. So you can have a lot of BigQuery projects, but you have other billing projects. So it's easy to confuse these two. There are different things. But in this new feature, we are working with the actual projects. And as a GCP, a Google Cloud Platform user, you're part of projects. However, you could have access to data sets not part of a project that you're a member of. For example, we have customers that are working pretty agile. They like analysts to have you access to data sets without necessarily going through the process of adding them to the actual project. Which means they need access to data without being a project member. And that's the new feature in 10.9, and it's this checkbox. Include data from additional projects. So what they do, because we can't list data sets from projects that you're not a member of, what you can do is to add those projects manually. So you simply type your project names here. You can add many project names, separate them by comma, and in the next screen, the using connection UI, you will see data sets from those projects. So this unlocks additional use cases. It enables teams to be more agile and not go through the process of adding every single analyst to BigQuery projects. And once again, don't confuse projects with billing projects. Two different things. This controls where queries are billed. These are just plain projects. All right. Since we're already in Spotfire, I would like to demo another feature, and that is a data wrangling feature. So let me add some data, some sales data for the previous year. If I do that, I can configure bar chart and just configure it really quickly with some sales and regions. We can see that actually we have different regions here, but we can see that, for example, North America, we have 2 bars for North America, and they seem to be similar, and they should basically be just 1 bar. Same thing with EMEA, 2 bars, but a single category. What we can do in 10.9 is to go to the data panel and have a look at the region column, and we will see that we now have a new type of recommendations. So you have probably used a recommendation engine to create visualizations. In 10.9, we're introducing the first data action insight. So this insight tells me that I have unnecessary white spaces in my column. And it also tells me that by applying this, I can go from 6 to 4 unique categories. So click that, and instantly you will see that the visualization is updated with the result of only 4 categories. I have another feature to show as well, so that I also have So here's data from 2018. And as you know, we have the recommendation engine kicking in, adding it as rows. And why did I do this? I did this to show you that we have a small feature in the data canvas too. So sometimes it can be really hard to find, in this case, where those new rows were added. But in 10.9, it automatically scrolls into view of the previous rows and the recently added rows. And the same thing works with add columns. It will be easier to find where the old and new rows meet. So great enhancements, easier to see that you have got things correct. All right. Yep, this was the BigQuery slide. You can see that we now have tables from the data sets from projects you are not a member of. All right, moving on. When you work within database data, and it can be pretty big, and you use table plots, we now have a performance setting to manually add columns for table visualizations. This means you can work with tables even on the largest data sets. Previously, all columns would be visualized by default. If you have this box checked, you can add columns one by one. Those adding columns in a more controlled manner, being able to work with larger tables, even if you're visualizing row level details. So use this if you need table visualizations on large in database data. And this is the icon you will see when you drag and drop columns. And you have maybe seen it when you're working with cubes. This is the default behavior when working with cubes. Right, we have also made some updates to the connector SQL. So when you work with connectors and push-down queries, you should be able to see fewer on-demand subqueries. Subqueries are sometimes complex for databases. So by reducing them, you can either work on larger data sets or basically see better performance. In the Google BigQuery connector, we have also started to use tuples in. And by having queries written in a tuples in fashion, we're able to work with larger data sets, mark more items in visualizations, and basically enable more use cases on big data. The Oracle connector has support for Oracle TAF, Transparent Application Failover. So if something happens to your main Oracle instance, the Spotfire connector now supports that Oracle is switching to the connection up and running. And the configuration you need to use this feature is the connect descriptor, basically a text field where you enter your connection string. And when Spotfire has access to that string, it can keep the connection up and running. Teradata. This is a great feature for administrators and DBAs. By adding something called Teradata query band information, you can track queries. So you can track queries coming in to Teradata, not only that they are coming from Spotfire, you can even go to the analysis name and even the visualization name. So you will actually know which user used which DXP and which visualization created this query that is causing problems. So great enhancements for users who are interested in troubleshooting, for example, ad hoc usage of Spotfire and Teradata. We have enabled new data sources on typical cloud Spotfire, 9 of them. So you can now refresh data on typical cloud Spotfire directly in the web clients from Snowflake. That's the big one, really hyped data source right now. So now you can publish dashboards to TCS and refresh data in the web clients. We have also enabled Postgres, Amazon Aurora for Postgres, RDS Postgres, Azure Postgres, and we have also enabled MySQL, plain MySQL on Oracle, but also Aurora, RDS, and Azure. New data sources on premises in 10.9, Aurora Postgres, RDS Postgres, and Azure Postgres. And we have also made sure that existing integrations works with the latest and greatest versions of Dremio, Oracle, Postgres, and SQL Server. Data wrapping, and this was the feature we just had a look at. So by realizing that you have unnecessary categories, go to the data panel, have a look at that column, use the recommendation for a data action that may be there, and see the result in fewer categories and correctly configured visualizations from the beginning. I forgot to mention this in the demo, but as always, everything is editable, so you can go back to the source view and either remove the transformation that was applied to remove the white spaces, learn from it, maybe edit it, or just review what was done. Yeah, this is a scroll into view feature, easy to find where old and new rows meet. On the final data table, we now have a plus sign, so you can use this to add calculator columns, add hierarchies. And if you already have hierarchies, you can now edit hierarchies from the source view as well. Thank you. Over to Miguel and the Spotfire Server.
Yep. Now I can share my screen. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks. I'm Miguel Diaz. I'm Senior Product Manager for Spotfire Server. And I'm going to show you what's new in Spotfire Server 10.9. First of all, I'm very happy to announce that for 10.9, finally, PostgreSQL is supported as Spotfire database. This is one of the most voted ideas for the server in the idea portal and pops up in almost every customer conversation. Spotfire supports now versions 11 and 12, both for Windows and Linux, Spotfire database. Version 12 is the latest stable version, while version 11 of PostgreSQL is the latest version supported by the major cloud providers. As you know, till now, customers have the possibility of using either Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle DB for the Spotfire database. And these are good products, but for some customers, it was difficult to redistribute their solution using these two databases. Some others see it as a limitation due to different database availability on different cloud service providers. And also many other customers see it as a complex price, the complex price model and license cost of these products are a big concern. Now, by adding Postgres support, we have decreased the barrier of adoption / redistribution of our product and decreased the operational cost for our customers and also for ourselves. This added support is part of our efforts to be vendor neutral. As part of keeping up with our existing software dependencies, Spotfire now supports Microsoft SQL Server 2019 for Windows as Spotfire database. This was also requested in the idea portal. Now here it is. This version is the latest public release of SQL Server. We continue working to increase the Spotfire Server robustness. As some of you may know, the TIBCO Spotfire Server uses the third-party component Apache Ignite for server clustering and distribute cache. And Apache can be deployed in many different ways. As till now, we have included Apache Ignite within the TSS process. Instead, in 10.9, we run Apache Ignite as a separate process. And this is because we discovered that on some specific scenarios, this configuration significantly increases the system stability. We found out via support cases that certain Windows antivirus software were interrupting the software analyst software upgrades. And in order to avoid this Windows antivirus false positive, the upgrade process is now launched from the folder where Spotfire Analyst is installed and not from the temporary folder as it was till that 10.8. This will be effective in the Spotfire Server, in the Spotfire Analyst upgrades from version 10.9. And that's all from the server side.
So, final section here is about Spotfire Developer and what's new in that area. So in the API and SDK area, we have new APIs to configure the dual shared scales. We do have a new API to add Python data functions and the API for the new feature for display values in Spotfire. There is also an improvement to the workflow for developing Spotfire extensions. So you can now use a local certificate store to sign your extension. That concludes our presentation about the new features of Spotfire 10.9. We hope you found it useful and looking forward to any feedback you may have.